friends, in the series which we are doing on the making of contemporary India 1950 to 1990s, today we will talk about the Indian National Congress, or Congress for that matter, and how the role of the Congress during the national movement provided it some kind of an opportunity and platform so that it could garner a lot of support from the Indian population. And Congress definitely played an important role during the national movement in terms of the ideals and aspirations of the national movement, the way they were being reflected by the Congress party and other parties also, the communists, etc., socialists. They also supported the Congress during the national movement at different points of time, and at different times they differed as well. So today we will talk about the role of the Congress in 1950s electoral politics, and thereafter the kind of changes which came in the organization of the Congress as well, and how before independence we find that the members of the Congress party were also the members of some other parties as well. So this kind of a dual membership was allowed to the members of other political parties, that they could be the members of the Congress as well. But after independence we see that the kind of change which came, and a resolution moved by Sardar Patel where this kind of a facility was not being allowed to the members of other political party, those who had a constitution and a definite structure of the party. So that way many people they left the Congress at that point of time. Many socialists and communists, those who were the members of the Congress, they left the Congress, and it was an important development from that point of view. And we will also talk about the relations of Jawaharlal Nehru and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, and how they have been discussed among the historians as well and the political scientists. So in the course of our discussion we will try to bring out the role of the Congress in the electoral politics in 1950s and thereafter, and the kind of shortcomings or limitations of the Congress in the electoral politics over a period of time, because of which we find that there was the decay set in the Congress, and there was decline of the Congress in later times as well. So in terms of books or the material which you can refer to is Bipin Chandra, India After Independence, Ram Guha's India After Gandhi, Myron Wiener, Party Politics in India. So all this can be referred when you are talking about the Indian National Congress or the Congress. And when we talk about the role of the Congress, the way the Congress participated in the national movement during the colonial period, and how it reflected the ideals and aspirations of the national movement, and how Congress took lead in terms of the interim government, and even in the electoral politics when elections were held, not only at the center but in several states, Congress had a lot of support, and in many states Congress formed the government. So we find that this kind of a system which was there in India, where you will find that a multi-party system, it existed, and in the multi-party system there were several parties which were there apart from the Congress: the Communist, Socialist, Kisan Mazdoor Praja Party, and Bharatiya Jana Sangh, and all of them, they were functioning actively and successfully in 1951-52, and it was crucial to the development of parliamentary democracy in India. So we find that the parliamentary democracy in India which grew and developed, and how these political parties, they played an important role in that context. And we find that these political parties, all of them, they were national or all India in character, and in their organization, their structure, their program and policies, and how they were talking about the nation as a whole, and they were not all that regional specific in their concern. And when we talk about the objectives, we find that how the all India issues, they were being taken up by these political parties, and the kind of programs which were initiated by them the social, economic, political development of the country, then they were talking from the framework of the national point of view rather than the regional point of view. And when you tend to see the comparison of these parties with the Congress, then definitely we will find that Congress had more support in that sense, because in the parliament and the state legislatures we find that the Congress governments they were there. But it did not mean that these political parties they were playing some kind of a peripheral role. Rather they were quite active, and in that sense these political parties being in a position were also playing an important role in that context, that they were talking about the issues, various issues, and how these issues they could be taken up at that point of time, and when these opposition parties they were raising those issues, then the government had to be on its toes to attend to those issues. And this way we find that the government was put at some kind of a criticism, and we find because of this criticism, when the government had to deal with so many issues, then the right decisions were to be made, keeping in mind the kind of consensus which was to be built, keeping in the other part, keeping in mind the kind of confidence which was also being generated by the other parties. So the opposition parties, they had to be kept in confidence while dealing with the various issues, and the policies they were to be framed keeping in mind the kind of opposition which was there, and at the same time that how the opposition parties they were raising those issues. One thing which is important is that during this period we do not find that the opposition parties they could display any kind of a unity during this period, and we find that they had more in common with the Congress rather than between each other, and many times they could not come in a united manner against the Congress. And this kind of an opposition disunity it was not accidental, because other opposition parties had before 1947 been part of the national movement as well, and it was only when left and right parties they could unite formally or informally, then they could defeat Congress in 1977 and 1989. So we find that this kind of opposition disunity which was there at that point of time, it was also because of the fact that they had their policies and the programs, they were quite close to the programs and policies of the Congress, and thereafter when all of them they united, then they were able to defeat Congress at that point of time. And we also find that how Congress was able to provide some kind of a stable government at the center, and there was a lot of political stability, and how it had immense prestige during this period, because the legacy of the national movement was attached with the Congress, and the electorate realized this. And later we find that how at the initiative of Sardar Patel a provision was inserted that no person belonging to any other political party or group which had its own constitution and organizational structure could be its member. So we find that because of which so many people, those who were members of the Congress and of the other political organizations as well, they left the Congress party. And we find that when we tend to understand Congress in a way, then there was some kind of a organizational looseness in terms of the ideological framework and programmatic diversity which was there, and Congress was ready to reconcile with the other factions as well. And Bipin Chandra, he has argued that the Congress socialists, they misunderstood the emerging character of the Congress, and they assumed, especially after the Patel amendment, that it was no longer to be broad based, and it was being transformed into a right wing bourgeois party with a definite ideological and programmatic commitment to capitalist path of development. So Bipin Chandra he tries to convey that how the Congress socialists, they were not able to understand the character or the nature of the Congress, and they presumed that how Congress would turn out to be, and how Congress would lead to the capitalist path of development over a period of time. And from this point of view, when people they left Congress, then it was some kind of a blow to the broad based character of the Congress party. And at different areas, different platforms, these kind of ideas they got reflected. And we also find that how Congress, it in a way remained sensitive to and functioned as medium for reconciliation, accommodation and adjustment of diverse and divergent class, sectional and regional interest, as it had done during the anti-imperialist struggle as well. So we find that the Congress had that kind of a capacity to compromise, how to reconcile with the different kinds of views which were there, and how whether the propertied section or the socially dominant groups and the poor and the deprived, all of them collectively they were to be reconciled in some way. So that is how the Congress had functioned during the colonial period, and thereafter as well the policy of the Congress was to take everyone together. And that is how the different social and political forces they were being how Congress engaged with them. And over a period of time we find that the left parties, they were not able to engage with a wider group or section of people, and because of which the members of the left groups, those who were the members of the Congress as well, and now they were only members of the socialist and the communist parties, they in a way lost touch with the Congress in the long run, and Congress also lost touch with these people. And we find that this kind of a inclusive character of the Congress was due to the national movement, and it also believed in the national consolidation, democracy, and it felt that social change has to come, and this social change will only come with the consent of a large number of people, those who are living in the society. So we find that when we tend to understand Congress during the national movement and immediately after independence, then it was talking about the issues of economic development and social justice, and at the same time how the wealth was to be redistributed in the society, and how more and more opportunities they were to be provided to the people. So Bipin Chandra has argued that how Congress had three important features as a centrist party, that how opposition parties were able to influence Congress through the mass agitations, or how the like-minded groups within the Congress they were able to influence it, and which we find that how such kind of groups they existed in the Congress. Secondly, this conciliatory attitude, it led to the opposition parties being open to absorption, and how Congress was able to absorb the social base, cadres, programs and policies of opposition party, and how they could be pacified and co-opted in the popular movement through concessions and conciliations. We also find that the opposition parties, whether they were from the left or the right, they tended to define themselves in extreme terms in order to prevent their cadres and followers and even leaders from being co-opted or absorbed by the Congress. So these were the three issues which have been talked about by Bipin Chandra. And we also find that in terms of the extreme positions which were taken by the left and the right parties, and they had some kind of negative consequences for the parties concerned, because in a way they tended to isolate them in some way from the public opinion, and many times it made them vulnerable to the splits. And we find that how the president of the Congress, J.B. Kripalani, and he felt that the government, the party should have some kind of a direct intervention in the government, and whatever decisions which are taken by the government, it should be in consultation with the party. But the other leaders of the Congress, they were not in favor of such kind of a position, and they felt that the proceedings and the papers of the government they were secret and they could not be divulged to the party, and how the government was responsible to the parliament and the legislature. So they thought in that framework that party can lay down any kind of a general policies and the goals, but the specific issues they had to be taken up by the government, and how the government could not be made accountable to the party, because the government was accountable to the legislature. And they felt that how the autonomy of the parliamentary wing should be there. And so this kind of a situation created some kind of a problem within the leaders of the Congress, and because of such kind of differences, we find that how J.B. Kripalani felt frustrated, because he felt that he should be consulted, or the party should be consulted, and finally he resigned from the post of the party president. And he felt that how the Congress how is the Congress to give the government its active and enlightened cooperation unless the highest executive or its popularly chosen head is taken into full confidence on important matters that affect the nation. So this was the kind of view which was held by J.B. Kripalani, that the party president or the party should be consulted in terms of any decisions which were to be taken by the government. And thereafter we see, once he resigned, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and thereafter Pattabhi Sita Ramaiah, for 1 year and 2 years respectively, they were there as the party president, and none of them they talked about the issue of organizational supremacy. And both of them they felt that the government should stick to that task, and the party will not interfere from that perspective. And thereafter we also see when this issue could not be resolved, even before that there was some problem when Purushottam Das Tandon became the president of the Congress. And with regard to the relationship of Nehru and Patel, also the historians and the political scientists, they have talked about their differences, and how they have also overlooked the commonness which existed between them. And many a times these kind of differences they have been exaggerated as well, because both of them they had temperamental as well as ideological differences. So Bipin Chandra has talked about their relationship, and he says that after 1947 policy differences on several questions they cropped up between Nehru and Patel, and both of them they referred on the role and authority of PM and the Prime Minister, and the manner in which the riots of 1947 were to be handled, and also the relations with Pakistan. So we find that on major issues both of them they had differences, but at the same time both of them they had healthy respect for each other as well. They were not that much critical of each other, and wherever they had these difference of opinion, they tried to resolve them as well. Even when they had differences in terms of the election of the Congress president, when Purushottam Das Tandon got elected. But on the same hand, we find that how the Patel's view with regard to the right to property, which was included as the fundamental right in the constitution. So their differences they did not come in their working relationship, and whenever they felt that these kind of breaches they were happening, then both of them they offered to resign, as argued by Bipin Chandra, from the government for one or the other reason. But both of them they also in a way continued, and there was no final parting of the ways, because the abiding values which were there, which connected them, and both of them they felt for the nation as well. So they were in a way complementary to each other, and how one was a great organization and able administrator, and how the other he commanded mass support among the masses. So both of them they had the idea of development of the nation and the idea of nation building in their minds, and we find that they had some kind of a mutual affection for each other, and both of them, they recognized the indispensability of each other. Though these kind of differences, though they were there, but at the same time we also have to realize that both of them, they worked together collectively for the nation. We will talk further about the Congress party and the kind of role it played in the electoral politics in the next lecture. Thank you very much.